Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are the FAIRtax guys. This is a new cube. You haven't seen this one. This is my little 9x9. It's fairly compact in size, but it's got a lot of pieces on it. So
I was going to say that thing. How do they make those things? Is there somebody that knows how to put those together? Is it a machine that does that?
Apparently so. The internal workings of these larger cubes is pretty complex. I can't begin to figure it out. But
it's probably just as complicated as actually doing it.
Yeah, but it's not as complicated as the tax code. I can tell you that.
And I love the correlation between the Rubik's Cube variations and the tax code, because depending on which side of the tax code you're standing on will give you a completely different insight into the tax code.
Well, how was your vacation? You took a week off, and Jade Wally was here with his Wally's World last week. That worked out really well.
That was great, and I had a time to spend with my sister, who I don't get to see that much, and it's become a tradition. Sometime around the first part of to the middle part of August, that's what we're doing. Is we're visiting. It's sort of a mini vacation ahead of the vacation. So,
okay, well, a lot has happened. Since last we spoke. As a matter of fact, so much has happened this week. Then this is going to be a tremendous sacrifice that I'm going to actually forego the Congress.gov segment this week, so that we can have the entire time here to talk about the development. Of course, last week when Jade was on with his Wally's World, he touched on the Inflation Reduction Act and its massive increase in the IRS budget. And one of the things that has happened since then is that bill has now passed the Senate. 51 to 50, the vice president had to cast the deciding vote, and it has not quite passed the House yet as we're recording this, but there's zero chance it's going to get derailed in the House, and zero chance that the president will refuse to sign it. So for all intents and purposes, that thing is law now. Yeah. And you should see, you're on Facebook too. I have just been amazed by just the explosion of memes and articles and people talking out there on Facebook anyway. I'm not on Twitter, but I'm on Facebook. I see it. There's almost a level of alarm in the populace now about how many new IRS agents they're going to buy. You see memes on Facebook that says this football stadium's not big enough to hold all of the new IRS agents they're going to hire. And right. Why don't we hire 87,000 new school resource officers instead of 87,000 IRS agents? And the one that really thought was good, I don't remember the exact number, but it was a little over 700. There are, I think, 724 billionaires in the country, and the IRS wants 87,000 new IRS agents. Guess what? They're not coming after just the billionaires; they're coming after you.
Right.
And I was told earlier this week. Mike Simmons, a volunteer here in Florida, yes, who does a web development company for a living and knows how to use all these, online analyticals that us, common folks can look at and still have no clue what it's telling you. He was saying that getting rid of the IRS has become just a massively popular online search engine search in the past few days. So, folks, if you want to get rid of the IRS, we know how to do it.
Yeah. Hey, over here, we have the plan. It's here. It's called a tax on consumption, the fair tax. It's simple.
You tax spending instead of income.
Let me ask you this, because
go ahead.
Politically speaking, because everything is so politicized now. I mean, even what you put on your hot dog or your hamburger, or the pizza, there's some political issue with what you're putting on there. But if we could just get past the politics of it and realize what it would do to the economy, especially now that we're at 8.5%, it was 9.1 last month. August is 8, or July is 8.5% inflation.
It's backing off a little, but it's still awfully high.
Well, that's right. The Treasury, the federal government, the banks, they all look at something reasonable, like a 2% inflation rate is what would be common. and we're now talking about four times higher than what would normally be acceptable in terms of inflation. If you take a tax on consumption, you take a certain amount of the rigmarole with the lobbyists out of it, but you also encourage savings. You reorient folks' mindset into how they spend their money, when or if they spend their money, and the fair tax does that in a great way. And as you and I were talking before we started our program today, if people would take a look at what we're talking about with a tax on consumption versus a tax on income, you would do away with the need for $87 billion of our money to go to the Internal Revenue Service. And I'll finish up my segment here with the breakdown of the $80 billion that's been given to the Internal Revenue Service. How are they going to spend this? Well, $45.6 billion for enforcement operations, $25.3 billion for operations support. That's somebody sitting at a desk somewhere. $4.75 billion for internet technology systems modernization. That's moving it from DOS to Windows 11 or something similar. $3.1 billion for taxpayer services, and $15 million, get this, $15 million to prepare a report for Congress. $15 million.
Well, I would note that both of the first two items that you named off, both of those are more than the entire IRS budget currently is.
Yes,
current IRS budget.
This is additional to. This is not flat going up to 80 billion. This is, you already have the what is
12. I've heard estimates from 12 to 14 billion. Is what the IRS budget is. And now in both of those top 2 points you mentioned, they're going to spend more money on just those two things than the entire agency is spending now. Now, let that sink in for a while.
So we're going to get, this is our tax money that's going to the Internal Revenue Service. Think about this for a minute. That they're going to use it to pay for more Internal Revenue Service agents to audit. They say Americans making less than $400,000 are off the table. We'll talk about that in a minute. But enforcement,
got a bridge in Brooklyn, I'll sell you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll buy it. $45.6 billion. $45.6 billion out of the 80 for enforcement operations. Now, when you eat peanuts, you got the shells go, kind of go all over the table, and maybe some of them fall on the floor. All that money isn't necessarily going to go in your mouth. It's not necessarily the whole peanut's not going to go. You're going to have some shell that's going to be looking around. So the whole IRS enforcement operation thing, and people say $45.6 billion. This is insane. So everybody, Treasury, all the way to the IRS commissioner, this past week or so, the week that we're recording our program, have jumped into the media in front of the microphones and have said the IRS has been like Janet Yellen, the director of the Internal Revenue Service, the Treasury Secretary. She says she is directing the Internal Revenue Service not to use new funding to increase chances of audits of Americans making less than $400,000. That's the headline from CNN in an article that was published a few days ago. Yes, we're recording on a Friday the 12th, and so this article came out on the 11th. Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, on Wednesday directed the Internal Revenue Service not to use any of the new funding allocated in the Democrats' new health care and climate bill to increase the chances of Americans making less than $400,000 a year getting audited, according to a copy of a letter obtained exclusively by CNN. The letter to IRS Commissioner Charles Rettig comes amid attacks from Republicans that $80 billion, the Inflation Reduction Act, would give the IRS over the next 10 years would result in more middle-class Americans and small businesses getting audited. Well, I'd venture to say it's not just Republicans, it's everybody that's out
there. I've just been amazed at the explosion in social media of people who have finally woke up. We have been pounding and pounding and pounding away here on FAIRtax Power Radio for years about how the IRS is abusive, the IRS is intrusive into your life, the IRS ignores the Bill of Rights. There is reason after reason after reason after reason to get rid of it. And now I think people are finally waking up to the fact that, hey, we might want to get rid of this monstrosity. And so more than ever before, if you haven't written a letter to the editor of your newspaper supporting the FAIRtax, now's the time to do it. If you haven't called your local talk shows or even tried to get through to some of the national talk shows and brought up the FAIRtax as an alternative to the IRS, you need to do it. You know, if you haven't gone to a town hall meeting and brought up the FAIRtax with candidates for office, you need to do it. Now is the time to make people realize the FAIRtax, and the only way you're going to get rid of the IRS is to get rid of the income tax that it's charged with enforcing and administering. Flat tax won't do it. You hear, well, we don't need the IRS because we're going to make taxes so simple you can put it on a postcard. Who are you going to mail the postcard to?
The Internal Revenue Service.
That's crazy. If we want to get rid of the Internal Revenue Service, and it seems like more and more people are finally catching on that this is something that we should have done a long time ago, and they're looking, if you look at the search engine statistics that Mike showed us, that people are looking on how do we get rid of the IRS? The answer, folks, is that you support candidates who will enact the FAIRtax, because the FAIRtax switches their taxation from your income to your consumption. You will no longer have an income tax with the FAIRtax. And that's something that a lot of the dishonest opponents of the FAIRtax will like to say. They'll try to paint the FAIRtax as being, oh, this is just an additional tax burden on top of everything, and just conveniently forget to tell you that the income tax goes away, which means withholding goes away, the payroll taxes that do Social Security and Medicare go away, tax returns go away, and the IRS goes away with the FAIRtax, because the FAIRtax will be administered and enforced by the various state revenue collection agencies. The infrastructure is already in place to collect the FAIRtax. We don't need anything new at the federal level. We can get rid of what we've got. So, folks, please, you write your letters, call your talk show hosts, get out there to your candidates, and let's push for the FAIRtax as hard as we possibly can, because if we don't, we're going to get these 87,000 new IRS agents, and people making $400,000, under $400,000 a year. I can guarantee you more of them are going to get audited than before.
Absolutely. And of course, Secretary Yellen says the enforcement resources will focus on high-end non-compliance. And I don't know how you have any organization with tens of thousands of people and you know exactly what they're doing every day of the week, every hour of the working day. So the new IRS funding is projected to raise $124 billion with a B in additional tax revenue over the next 10 years, which is a way that the whole program, the increase for the IRS, was sold. And there are other things that come into play in the Inflation Reduction Act that get this $124 billion in additional revenue. So they're actually going out and trying to find money that, in the current state of the operation of the Internal Revenue Service income tax, the Internal Revenue Service is going to go out and find this money to pay for other things that have been promised inside of the Inflation Reduction Act, like the lower prescription drug costs and combating climate change, which is a big deal for a lot of folks in the world, in Washington, and in different stages of development over the last couple of decades or so. So House of Representatives, as we said earlier, they're the ones that are probably right now this weekend going to pass that's going to go to the president's desk, and we'll see what happens. But hey, guess what? Enforcement is critical. And I've always said, hey, if you're the president and you didn't want to show your income tax, why didn't you just executive order the FAIRtax in, and and you'd have solved the problem. You wouldn't have to worry about whether or not you were going to get audited because the IRS wouldn't be there in the first place through your executive order. But here we are with a lot of people, me included. I'm sitting here going, I pay my taxes. I'm not jumping into any kind of bandwagon of, I'm not going to pay and all this other stuff. But I really do believe that we have a lot of folks out there, me included, who the Internal Revenue Service always been a part of my life. Haven't seen a day in my lifetime that I, didn't have to pay taxes, or my dad wasn't sitting on the couch, every February, March, and part of April, putting his taxes together and everything. We're a society that doesn't see how a country can operate without an income tax or some method of getting it in, because I've had people respond to quotes and comments on Facebook on our page, on the FAIRtax page, that say, well, how are you going to fund the government if you don't have taxes coming in? It's like a superficial response that, and I think we're at a point now where, we've had this little boil on our hand, this little blister right here, and it got popped this week. Now it's hurting a little bit. So we're getting ready to say, hey, guess what? We need to have FAIRtax come in and replace the income tax right away, because this
regardless of what Janet Yellen says, and regardless of what the IRS commissioner says, Steve Hayes has made this point several times in some of the chairman's reports he's written. Tax evaders do not identify themselves to the IRS. When they send in their taxes, they try, of course, to make it look as legitimate as possible.
Right.
So, there aren't any red flags. Oh, you need to audit me because I'm trying to cheat. So in order to really enforce what they're trying to do, the IRS is going to have to treat every tax return they get as suspicious, which means there are going to be multiplied millions of people who are honestly trying to do it right, who may make some honest mistakes along the way because the tax code is so doggone cumbersome, nobody can figure it all out. But the
like
IRS
your Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, they're going to have to treat every tax return as suspicious if their goal is to get rid of the evasion, because the evaders don't identify themselves, which means there are going to be millions of people, honest taxpayers, that are going to be treated like criminals, that are going to be subject to scrutiny that they don't deserve. And so this thing, we're only going to go after the high-end tax evaders. Well, in order to do that, you've got to put everybody under suspicion and apply this enhanced enforcement against everybody. And you sent me an article earlier this week that says this is going to be a nightmare for small businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. It's already, the smaller small businesses, and of course, every time that there's an increase in cost to the business, it goes directly to the consumer, no matter who you are. If you're in retail, especially, or you're selling cars or houses for that matter, housing prices are, it's difficult to navigate through. Some people have the ability to go out and get a house and maybe it's their second or possibly their third. But if you have somebody who is just getting in, just out of college, and they're starting to look at, settling down, and maybe they've been married or they're getting ready to get married and want to have a house. Well, it's impossible sometimes to find, because of the costs involved in getting into that first piece of real estate. Other people, from a standpoint of a business, mine, for example, radio, you sell ads. I get the question sometimes, well, how are you all doing during this downturn in the economy and inflation and everything? I said, well, we're not a utility that we can go and, for one of our clients, for example, cut off their electricity. If they can't pay us or don't or won't, there's not a whole lot we can do. We're doing pretty good, though. I mean, we're a small business. We're not, 100 people or anything like that. So through that whole scale of small business, meaning maybe 2 or 3 people or an entrepreneur of somebody who's a single operator, to somebody that's even at 100 people or maybe 1,000. You have to stop and think for a minute. How are we going to pay for the supplies to keep to stay in business? How are we going to pay for our floor plan if we're a used car dealer, for example? Or how are we going to, and now whatever comes in with compliance for the Internal Revenue Service for our taxes, that ends up getting passed on to the consumer. And there's, the guy that makes a hamburger down the street, he's having to pay an extra, couple bucks for cheese or eggs or the hamburger meat that comes in, the bread, and, his rent. His landlord just came to him and says, I'm going to have to charge you a little more because my electricity bill went up. And so people are really, it's a difficult time with small businesses right now. Compliance with the Internal Revenue Service doesn't just go away, except for with a tax on consumption, the fair tax. I get excited because I really think, and I look at people that are walking down the street today, and I wonder, they're making a decision between, I'm going to be able to not, in order to pay for my meals this next month or two, I'm going to have to maybe not go on vacation, or, I'm not going to have to drive as much. And so all these things are going on in people's minds. And then you have the Internal Revenue Service getting, they're going to print $80 billion for them. That's going to come from us at some point in the future. And you just wonder how, and we always get into this deep conversation about what are we going to do. And really what we're talking about is, it's real simple. And I think we're at a place where we have a sense of urgency to move this process forward, fast forward, and offer, here's how you solve a lot of problems with one simple fair tax.
Get rid of the income tax, replace it with a fair tax, get rid of the IRS and all that stuff. But real quickly, I pulled up that article from the New York Post you sent. Let's give credit to the article. It's Lydia Monahan wrote it. It was published August 3rd, a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
But she's saying that small business owners, quoting here, may soon be in for a lengthy and expensive battle with the IRS. Key provision in the Inflation Reduction Act, which throws an extra $80 billion at the IRS to improve the agency's collection, will end up targeting small business owners to pay for the legislation. This is according to the nonpartisan watchdog, the Joint Committee on Taxation. And on farther down there, they make another point, the same point that Steve Hayes has made several times on his chairman's reports. They're not going to go after the high-end people that have the resources to fight back. They're going to go after the folks who it's just easier, it's actually cheaper to pay it than to fight it.
True.
And, if you've got the resources to fight it, you might fight it even though it costs you more just on principle. But if you're a small business that's just getting by, and the IRS comes in and says you owe us X number of dollars more, and it's going to cost you Y dollars more to fight it, and X is a smaller number, you just pay it rather than fight it. And they know that it's been going on forever. So that's brought up in this article as well.
And I think and we were talking a minute ago about how we haven't lived in a time where there was no income tax. And I think we think, well, this is where we are. This is the way we have to do it because this is the only way. Well, and I think now people are waking up and going, oh my gosh, this is really, there's a lot, there's 87 billion. And they're going, how are we going to get this? How are we going to solve this? Well, thankfully, we're going to put our cape on and we're going to zoom in like Superman and say a tax on consumption, the fair tax specifically, solves a lot of problems, and especially the big elephant in the room right now, which is the $87 billion Internal Revenue Service budget increase.
I would direct people here to New York Post or nypost.com to check this out. A couple other things I wanted to mention here real quickly before our time runs out on us.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of new candidate pledge signers.
Yes.
Candidates have signed the Fair Tax Candidate Pledge.
Thank you.
There's a gentleman in Michigan. His name is Stephen Elliott. He has already won the primary there. He will be facing Rashida Tlaib in the general election. And there's a lady named Tina Forte, I guess it's how you say it, F-O-R-T-E, Tina Forte,
Yes, Forte
is running to unseat AOC in New York. That's the 14th district there. That primary is next week, August the 23rd. I've reached out to both of these candidates. We want to interview as many of these folks as we can as they sign the pledge. So we'll try to get a hold of Mr. Elliott since he's already won his primary. If Ms. Forte wins hers, we'll try to get hers as well. So hopefully we will have some more FAIRtax candidate pledge signers to talk to in the future. And also another big story that's shown up on a lot of the FAIRtax boards. You know a lady named Marjorie Taylor Greene?
I've heard the name. She's Georgia, isn't she?
She is a, shall we say, rather controversial figure in the House of Representatives. She represents a district that's just northwest of Atlanta. And I don't go on Twitter. I don't even have a Twitter account, but I saw where Marjorie Taylor Greene posted on Twitter, hey, let's get rid of these 87,000 new IRS agents by passing the FAIRtax. So now people are trying, oh, well, do we want her somewhat that controversial, and that polarizing as someone that we want on board with a FAIRtax? And I'd say, well, I just remember Neil Bortz wasn't exactly a pussycat. He was really bombastic. He insulted people. He offended people. He took great joy in doing both. Right. And he wasn't doing his job if he wasn't offending people. But he had a national platform, and he used it to promote the FAIRtax. So I think it's great that Marjorie Taylor Greene is coming out and specifically saying we need to pass the FAIRtax. Now, somebody in her district needs to tell her, well, you need to co-sponsor. She's not a co-sponsor yet. But the fact that someone, with that kind of a national profile has been moved by the fact that we're getting all these new IRS agents to come out in favor of the FAIRtax, I think is great.
Well, and again, I think, some of the challenges in the words, because you have FAIRtax, 4 letters, and you have flat tax, 4 letters. And if you're flying at 37,000 feet over the challenge that we have, and you hear FAIRtax, flat tax, and a lot of people in the conversations, they say it, and it's almost interchangeable in a lot of people's minds. Really what we're talking about, because Steve Forbes is all for the flat tax, a little postcard, and but you got the Internal Revenue Service, 2 different things altogether. And I think that's where we are right now. And again, everybody's like going, what was that? 87 billion to the Internal Revenue Service. I really got to start thinking about this.
I'm saying, I think we've got people's attention now. Again, I'll encourage you, if you haven't done so recently, to write a letter to the editor supporting the FAIRtax. Call your local talk shows. Try to get through the national ones if you want to. And of course, if you haven't joined Americans for Fair Taxation or your local or state agency or organization for the FAIRtax, invite you to do that. Go to fairtax.org. There's lots of resources there. And unfortunately, we have flat run out of time. We're going to have to continue this conversation next week. There's just more stuff that we didn't get to today. But
we'll be back before you know it.
We will get there next week on FAIRtax Power Radio. Until we meet again, I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
We are the FAIRtax guys, reminding you the FAIRtax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
The FAIRtax is a tax replacement plan where we take all the federal income taxes, including corporate, personal, gift, and estate taxes, and replace them with one national consumption tax on new purchases above the poverty level only. This form of consumption tax comes with no exceptions and is progressive, not regressive. The poor are not paying more, and the rich are not paying less. What makes it progressive is that all Americans are untaxed up to the poverty level via the prebate, much like your standard tax deduction. The taxes are collected by retail businesses at state level, so the system is more accountable. The IRS is done away with, and you have control over your money and what the overall tax rate your household pays. The FAIRtax is revenue neutral, so the government receives the same amount of money as they do now, and it's fair because you decide what's fair, not them. To learn more, visit fairtax.org and be sure to like us on social media to help educate your friends and spread the word.